This is Dan Rea, the host of Nightside. I hope you enjoy listening to the Nightside podcasts here at the Nightside website, and I invite you to join us every Monday through Friday night from 8 to midnight for Nightside on WBZ News Radio 1030. I saw a story today which really bothered me, and we are happy to have with us tonight conservative columnist Stacy Washington. Stacy is much more than just a conservative columnist. She is a thinker. She does radio. She is, I believe, a Missouri native. She also is the co-chair of Project 21, which is a group of black conservatives. We've had some of her colleagues on this program on many occasions. Horace Cooper jumps to mind, who I believe is the co-chair of this group. And Stacy has just, I think, been the victim of discrimination, not necessarily racial discrimination, although she does happen to be black, but of what I would call philosophical or political discrimination. And I don't know if Stacy's going to agree with me on that, but I want to welcome Stacy back to WBZ Nightside. Stacy, how are you tonight?
I'm doing great. Just as a point of clarification, though, I grew up in Germany. My father was in the Army, and so we've lived in Missouri for a few years, but I'm not a Missouri native.
Okay, fair enough. And I also know that your family has served for generations, and you served in the U.S. military.
Yes, I was in the Air Force, as was my husband, and then my father, grandfather, and great-grandfather were in the Army.
But pretty much everything else that I believe you've had 4 generations. Everything else that I've said is correct. You are a co-chair with Project 21, and you identify yourself as a conservative.
Yes.
And you are involved, I know, in radio. I've seen you interviewed on television. As a matter of fact, I believe tomorrow morning this story is going to be told on Fox and Friends, if I'm not mistaken.
We're doing that on Sunday, but
Sunday.
I was on Charles Payne tonight, Making Money with Charles Payne on Fox Business, discussing the whole kind of, it was like a brouhaha that kind of exploded. We're really out of nowhere with me writing a column, as I always do, turning it in on Wednesday, which is the deadline, getting it back approved on Thursday. They have the right of first refusal. They could always say no, which means I can take the column somewhere else. I can, pitch it to anybody else, but for them to pay me, they have to accept it. And it was accepted with a little bit of editing. And then Friday it was published in print and at stltoday.com. And then that afternoon, while I was at the NRA convention, stalking around the 15 acres of guns and accessories in my cowgirl boots, I saw my email. I regret to inform you that you've been suspended. And I'm like, what?
Well, let me back up here a little bit, because a lot of folks probably don't know exactly what we're talking about. But let me, and help me out, correct me if I'm wrong here. Stacy is a journalist, but she's a journalist with a point of view. First of all, let's make that very clear. There's no, she's a writer, she's a thinker, she's a speaker. She is, as we would say in the business, the whole package. And she is now, are you living in the St. Louis area, or is it just?
Yeah,
okay.
We live in the metro area.
All right. And you are what's called an op-ed writer, opposite editorial page writer. Many people here in Boston are familiar with the op-ed pieces that appear in the Globe or in the Herald. You're not on the staff.
Nope.
You're paid every time your story, your opinion piece appears. And
right.
Your opinions are what they solicit. They want to have on their, not on their editorial page, but on the page opposite the editorial page, a diverse set of viewpoints. Some liberal, some conservative, some moderate, whatever. And they know who you are. And you wrote a piece that touched upon the National Rifle Association. It was in response to some other pieces that had been in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. And by the way, St. Louis Post-Dispatch is a major metropolitan newspaper, just like the Boston Globe and Boston Herald. So just for folks who do not know the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, it as a newspaper has been around for 150 years out there? I mean, it's an institution in the city, correct?
Yes, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch is the place where the Pulitzer Prize originated from. The Pulitzer family started the Post-Dispatch. It's got a very storied history.
Right.
And I'm Actually, I don't have journalism training. I'm not a journalist, but I do write opinion editorials as they requested, because they reached out to me for the relationship and said, hey, we want to balance our editorial page. Come on out, write these opinion editorials and so on.
Right. And by the way, I think the word journalist covers more than just reporters. I mean, if you are a reporter, you're supposed to be objective. It's almost redundant to say an objective reporter. But I think people who are involved in opinion writing or opinion speaking are also journalists on both sides. So I would not in any way hesitate in referring to you as a journalist. And I hope you don't take that as an insult, but it's intended to point out, in the cathedral of journalism, Stacy, there are many pews. And there's the reporter's pew, and there's the commentator's pew, and these op-ed pew, and the editorial page pews. I mean, that's all I'm trying to say. So I've been making that distinction because a lot of people view the word journalist as someone who, they have this training and they do reporting and all of that. And I've actually come into this career as, after being a stay-at-home mom for years and then serving as an elected official on a school board. And so I don't really have anything to prove by, trying to say, well, I'm also a reporter. Fair enough.
And I love to make that distinction because for liberals, they really place a lot of pride of place on labels, but then they don't behave in that way. And I'm placing importance on opinion editorialists because an opinion editorialist takes a story like these stories that appeared in the St. Louis American and the Columbia Missourian, which is a regional paper that's out in Columbia, Missouri, where this Professor Kennedy wrote this. It's just an awful screed against the NRA and its membership, comparing NRA members and gun owners to ISIS because ISIS kills people and the NRA helps, murderers kill people by making guns easier to obtain.
I want to get into the substance of your article. I also want to get into the reason you wrote the article. I got to take a quick commercial break here, and I also want to entertain phone calls. Everyone knows the number, but I'll give it out anyway, 617-254-1030, 888-929-1030. We're talking with Stacy Washington. She is the co-chair of a group called Project 21, and in Project 21 are a significant number of often young, black conservatives. And one of the hallmarks of this program is to try to make people understand that diversity is a good thing, and philosophical diversity is a very good thing, and that people of all backgrounds can arrive at different philosophical viewpoints based upon their life experiences. And a lot of people like to look at people and look at their outer covering and say, well, that person is gay, or that person is female, or that person is male, or that person is white or Hispanic or Asian or whatever, and therefore they must fit into this nice, neat little category. And certainly Stacy Washington and many, many other members of the intellectual black community, if I can use that term, on both sides. There are liberals and conservatives. Stacy happens to be a black conservative and a proud black conservative, and she has just been suspended as an op-ed writer at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and we'll explain why. And I think that the reason for the suspension is the thinnest reason of suspension that could possibly be given. We have reached out to the editorial page editor of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Todd Roberson, today, and of course we have not had any reaction to him. We would have given him an opportunity to have defended his position tonight, and we'll certainly give him an opportunity going forward. We'll get to the substance of it, and if you'd like to join the conversation, you know the numbers.
It's about time we had a little talk.
So let's talk.
Here comes the night.
The night side's on 10:30.
Nightside.
And all the people were calling, they went, na, 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 na.
With Dan Rea, WBZ, News Radio 1030.
My guest is Stacy Washington. For those of you who have not been listening and just joining us, Stacy is a conservative writer. She's a radio host. She is involved, she's the co-chair with Project 21, which are a group of black conservatives. Stacy comes from a family with great military service, spent her childhood in Germany while her dad was stationed overseas, and she herself has served in the U.S. military. And she is an unabashed conservative and has up until a few days ago, wrote op-ed pieces for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. So, Tracy, let's get to the substance here. There were a couple of other pieces. Were they op-ed pieces in the newspaper?
Yep, they were.
Op-ed
They
pieces?
were,
Okay.
but they weren't in the Post-Dispatch. So they were in other Missouri newspapers.
Fair enough.
And when I saw them, I was like, wait a minute.
All right. And so
these are all about guns.
So they were about guns and about, I assume, the NRA. And they were, as they have every right to be critical of the NRA, and they, pardon the pun, they took some shots at the NRA.
Yeah, but taking shots is, just talking about the general dislike or the need for more gun laws. This was an egregious example, two egregious examples of what I consider to be journalistic malfeasance, and that editors didn't say, wait a minute, this doesn't meet the ethical standards or the journalistic standards of our paper. And the first one was an article entitled, "We Love Our Guns More Than Our Children," and it was in the St. Louis American, which is our local weekly black paper here in the city of St. Louis. And this kind of gun control person wrote a guest opinion editorial just basically saying, these shootings that have happened in this place and that place and yada, 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 if we loved our kids more than we loved our guns, these shootings wouldn't happen because we would have common sense gun legislation. And then the second piece was in the Columbia Missourian by Professor Emeritus Kennedy, and he is the J School professor at Missouri State University, and he's a regular opinion editorial writer. In fact, I've done some research into him, and he is an interesting character because he gets away with murder down at that Columbia Missourian, not actual murder, but journalistic murder. And so what he said was, the NRA does lobbying activities in the U.S., and they scare politicians, and ISIS does terrorism around the world, and ISIS scares people. Well, this isn't about who's more frightened. Which of these groups would Professor Kennedy rather have lunch with? If he went to lunch with a group of people from ISIS, he would not return. If he went to lunch with a group of people who are NRA members, he would come back with a better understanding of why some people love to enjoy their Second Amendment rights. Yeah. So in one situation, he survives, in the other one, he's killed. So how are these two groups anywhere near the same? And that was the point that I made, in addition to the fact that 7% of the people who work in newsrooms across this country claim a Republican affiliation. 28% claim no political affiliation, and then you have the rest are openly Democrats or liberals. Well, that explains, and this is a survey that was done by Politico back in 2013, that explains why we see the kind of leftist slanted reporting that we're seeing. We need more balance, and that's what I call for in the column. And I also talked about...
Was it, Stacy, I just want to make sure I understand those numbers. 7% of journalists self-identify as Republican, and was it 28% identify as Democrat, or is 28% identify as non-aligned?
28% had no political affiliation.
And so, therefore, 65% identify as Democrat?
Right.
Whoa, I didn't realize.
Back in 2013, no less. So we don't know what those numbers would be like now if we could, because the survey is from 2013.
So you incorporated some of those ideas and some of that philosophy in the column that you submitted. I don't know if you do a weekly column, how often you would appear in the weekly St. Louis Post-Dispatch. You submitted. It was accepted by, I assume, someone on the editorial staff, accepted it, printed, and then on Friday, you are informed that you're going to be suspended for what reason?
Well, the reason that they gave was that so that I hadn't disclosed my quote-unquote lobbying and advocacy activities, paid or unpaid, on behalf of the gun industry and also my on behalf of the NRA. And so I've guest hosted the NRA, one of the NRA radio programs called Cam and Company. Mm-hmm. I've guest hosted that program a couple of times. I've appeared on it often. In fact, I was on it this week. I was on it last week. I mean, sometimes I'll go 5-6 weeks without going on it, and then I'll go on it because the stories that are coming out in the media are based out of the Midwest or out of St. Louis, where they have a particular bent that is similar to what I've discussed in the past. The real issue here is not that I've appeared on a program often. It's that they said I hid that information, which is impossible for me to do as I spend all of my social media reports on my my having a pro-NRA, pro-Second Amendment, pro-military. All of those things are openly promoted on all of my social media, and they're in my bios. They were covered in 2 articles written by reporters for the Post-Dispatch when I did an NRA documentary, and they were also in my opening column. When I first wrote my first column for the Post-Dispatch, I talked about who I am as a person, and I talked about religious freedom and the Second Amendment and just everything having to do with why they would ask me to be a writer.
So right. And they're not suggesting that you were paid or anything like that by the NRA, correct? As I understand it?
They did. They said that I was doing advocacy work.
Well, wait a second.
And they didn't care if it was paid or unpaid.
Well, that's ridiculous. There's a huge distinction there. They knew that you're a conservative, and they knew the positions that you would take, and the position that you have taken, in effect, defending the NRA is entirely consistent with, I guess, the reason why they would have invited you to become an op-ed columnist in the first place.
Exactly. A conservative would have the pro-Second Amendment, pro-gun views.
And it wouldn't even matter. You were responding as an op-ed columnist to some other columns, which is, look, anyone who reads op-ed pages in newspapers knows that there's often a back and forth, sort of a point counterpoint. One person said this and someone responds to it. That's what advocacy journalism is all about. Op-ed columnists are, by definition, in my opinion, advocacy journalists. So if they're accusing you of being an advocate, then you're guilty as charged, but that's an excuse. It sounds to me like they wanted to get rid of you for some other reason.
Well, I will say this. On all of the columns that I've written, there have been only just a couple where I've felt like, ooh, I wonder if they're going to, refuse this one. One of them was a pro-life column that I wrote that was highly, there were a lot of people who supported it, and there were a lot of people who sent me hate mail. Ridiculous amounts of hate mail over that pro-life column. And that was early on, like my 3rd or 4th column. And then this one. And I remember thinking to myself when I got done with it, and I was kind of polishing it off, adjusting this word, adjusting that word, and kind of slowing around. I'm thinking, I just need to turn this thing in. And it occurred to me just in that moment before I hit send, he might say he's not going to take this one. And he didn't have to give me a reason to do that.
Absolutely.
And so,
which was their right, which would be their right.
It was their right. And then if they refused it, I would just say, okay, thanks, and email it to someone else, but I might not get paid for it, because not every place you submit a column to is going to pay you. Sure. And so I thought this might be the first one they refused, because I felt the column was a strong defense of the right of Americans to, advocate or support the Second Amendment and the NRA. And I didn't feel like I'd hidden anything. In fact, it never even occurred to me that I needed to say, by the way, I was on Cam and Company this week, or by the way, I've guest hosted, a show on NRA TV.
But they would have known that. They would have known that when they hired you. And again, when I say hired you, when they basically asked you to become an op-ed columnist, which is, again, in terms of our parlance, freelance. You're not a staff member.
Right.
The editor who apparently cashiered you, Todd Roberson, released a statement. This is the only thing we have from him, and I want to read this, what I consider to be a ridiculous statement. Stacy Washington's column will no longer appear in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Her active promotional activities and professional association with the National Rifle Association. By the way, there's no suggestion that you have ever received money from the NRA, correct?
Well, no. He said it didn't matter if I received money, if I was paid or unpaid.
But
no, I haven't.
I just want to get that out there, because when someone uses your professional association, if I say someone is a professional athlete, that means they're being paid. This guy's a journalist. He's supposed to know that words have meanings. Her active promotional activities and professional association with the National Rifle Association represented an unacceptable conflict of interest in her most recent column, which resulted in our suspension of her work. Ms. Washington chose to terminate her contract. Columnists are expected to fully disclose conflicts of interest when writing about topics where such a conflict might arise. We apply this standard regardless of the lobbying or advocacy group being written about in a column. So that, to me, is an absolute sham of an excuse. And I, looking at it as someone who was a reporter for 31 years in television and is now a talk show host, these guys were gunning for you. They wanted you out.
Well, they may have. And for me, it's one of those things where I literally thought to myself as it was going on, I kind of couldn't believe it, but I also felt like, so they've done this to other columnists before. George Will, Tony Snow, a couple of other local radio hosts have been through the same process where they're asked to write a column for the Post-Dispatch, and then within a certain amount of months, they're then summarily dismissed or accused of something, or, that your column has bias, what have you. And so I knew it. I was told by a program director I know in the St. Louis region. He said, "Enjoy it while it lasts. Write your best work." But he was like, as long as it lasts, because they're very picky, and at some point you'll be out of favor, and they'll try to get rid of you.
A critical element of any op-ed column is bias. Op-ed columns are by definition what I would call point of view columns. They are not columns that are supposed to stay rigidly in the middle. Stacy, I got to take a quick break. I think you have been victimized, and I don't know if you want to accept this or not, but I think that you're... Oh, I don't know what sort of phone. I hope you're still with us there.
I'm still here.
All right, okay. I think that you have been victimized because you do not fit in as a young black female columnist. You do not fit into the comfortable pigeonhole that they want to assign you. That's the best way I can put it. Let me take a break. If you're listening, if you understand the story, I'd love to hear from you. 617-254-1030, 888-929-1030. This is, in my opinion, reprehensible for this newspaper to hire her for her points of view and then to turn around and dismiss her, suspend her for her articulating those points of view. And I say that with complete authority and complete belief to my very core. They're uncomfortable with her because perhaps of her race, who knows? But they are uncomfortable with her. They probably said she's too good a columnist. She's too effective with that point of view. And any conflict that exists here is not between what she wrote and her quote unquote promotional activities. The conflict is between her columns, her point of view, and the editorial position of this newspaper. Join us, please, back after this.
We had so much to talk about.
So we can't speak openly.
I think we should.
You talk, I'll listen.
Always listen to Nightside at 9.
Nightside with Dan Rea.
Always listen to Nightside at 9.
WBZ News Radio 1030.
What I'm interested in, Stacy, is whether or not my listeners agree with me that there is not only an anti-Second Amendment bias within major segments of our industry, our industry of quote-unquote journalism, and also how difficult it is to be identified as a black conservative. Again, I am someone who firmly believes that you treat people as you find them, irrespective of what their background is. I have many friends who disagree with me politically, but if they're good people, I enjoy their company, and we don't have to have battles over politics. We can still have friendships. I'm just wondering how difficult it is these days if you not only are a conservative, but if you happen to be African American.
Well, I got to say that in the beginning, it felt like it was difficult only because it was a kind of a radical paradigm shift for people who knew us and didn't know our politics. So they knew my family, my husband and our children, and they assumed because we were black that we were Democrats, and they were Democrats. And so when they had that kind of veil ripped off. It was a bit uncomfortable, and we really had some shifting of friendships. But at this point where I am so open about my views, I actually have some Democrats, black and otherwise, who tell me, I don't agree with you much, but I love listening to you on the radio. Or I don't agree with you much, but I love how strongly you hold to your beliefs. Or they'll say, if you're nothing if you're not out there. And so what I am is I'm a Christian, Jesus lover, Bible thumper, gun toter. I love to squeeze 250 rounds through a 40 caliber gun and just call that 30 minutes. I'm into being who I am, not because I'm promoting myself, but because I really believe in the hot-blooded American ethos. And there are some of us who are kind of like European Americans and, we don't have the hot blood in the veins. And then there are people like me. And so being out there and doing this for the purpose of informing people and helping people to understand how blessed we are to get to be Americans, to get to be citizens of this particular country. I love being able to do that. And so when you hit your stride and you find the thing that you're supposed to do, I believe you're supposed to get after it with everything you've got. You're supposed to run at it head first and don't stop until you're doing it to the best of your ability. That means that I'm not afraid to write about the NRA or pro-life or Christianity or submitting to your husband or anything like that. I'm not afraid to quote scripture, and I'm not afraid to offend someone because I'm not doing it to offend. The side impact might be offense, but it's not that's not the point of what I'm doing. And so because of that attitude, I've been able to not just weather the kind of negativity that sometimes comes from the organized, hardcore professional left, but I've been able to win over some people who are actually good-hearted, great people who just happen to be Democrats. And I value that the most when I get a message or an email or someone reaches out to me and says, you really won me over. And even though I still don't agree with you on every policy, I understand your heart and where you're coming from. And I really believe that we're sisters in, the American experience, or we're Americans together. And that to me is the most important thing. And so I know there's a lot of hate out there for black conservatives, and I especially get it if I ever go on CNN. It's like the roughest experience there is. But when I'm on regular media and I get hate mail, I understand that those are trolls behind a keyboard. And the others who are trying to engage in debate, they're misguided. They don't have the facts. And people who do support me and are looking out for hopefully, bigger and better things, understand that this situation with the Post-Dispatch is actually a blessing in disguise because I didn't want to publicize it at all. And I'm the queen of social media. I love tweeting and handling things online, but I wasn't going to do anything with this. And the Post-Dispatch leaked the story out, my suspension, without telling them I terminated the contract. I did it within hours of the notice of suspension. I'd already terminated the contract. Instead of them saying that, they leaked it out that I was suspended to a local radio host who's been a broadcaster for 35 years here on the flagship AM station in our area. And he asked me for an interview. And so I gave the interview, and the story began to snowball from there. That was Monday. And so, as of today, it's been on Fox and Friends and The Specialist, the new show on Fox, and Fox Business, and covered in major newspapers. The Washington Times has written a piece, Newsbusters, BizPack Review, and so many others, Twitchy. And this is all because they decided that they wanted to bring media attention to it. And what I did was I took to Twitter and I started tweeting out memes and kind of having fun with it because this isn't my bread and butter. Writing for the Post-Dispatch is not something that's going on my headstone when I pass out of this earth. I was writing there because they asked me to and I wanted to. And when I no longer wanted to, I terminated the contract. So the bigger story here is that bias in the media. It is the refusal of leftists to understand that the reason their subscriptions are going down the drain is because their papers are biased to the left and Americans are sick of it. And I talked about confirmation bias in the article about how we all seek opinions that support our own, but Republicans are running away from print media and legacy newspapers because not only can they not find anything to confirm themselves, but they're finding that they're constantly vilified and attacked. And the idea that people who set people on fire, behead people for Christianity, toss homosexuals off of buildings, destroy all of the written works in a culture because they're trying to establish a caliphate, the idea that barbarians like that are in any way related or similar or akin to law-abiding, gun-owning American citizens who are simply honoring the Constitution, it deserved to be called out. And I stand by what I wrote. It's not full of inaccuracies or wild misrepresentations. There are no problems with the column. And the reason Todd Robertson chose to print it was because it was good work. And the fact that he now regrets that is an issue for himself, not for me, because the opportunities are pouring in. And I'm grateful for it. I actually owe Todd a debt of thanks for suspending me, because now there's more amplification and more opportunity for me to do what I love.
Well, I'll tell you, you are a strong spokesperson. When we get back, I got a couple of more questions. I refer to it as the echo chamber, that too many people on both sides, both left and right, tend to gravitate towards points of view that comfort them as opposed to points of view that challenge them. I'm going to, again, just take a quick commercial break here, invite our callers to either commend or condemn what you just said. I commend what you just said, Stacy, and you said it better than I think anyone. I've got a couple of more questions. If folks want to join the conversation, they can. 617-254-1030, 888-929-1030. And people of principle on either side of the political spectrum should appreciate and I think honor your courage and your commitment. I would hope that you would get a Profiles in Courage Award from the Kennedy Library here in Boston for the stance that you've taken, although I do not want you, nor will I hold my breath waiting for that call. But our number, 617-254-1030, 888-929-1030.
The radio's all yours now.
You talk a lot. Just making conversation.
We're talking. Conversations knocking. Intelligence is rocking. Nightside.
Nightside with Dan Rea, WBZ News Radio 1030.
It's interesting, Stacy. You'll be interested to see if the major networks or the major East and West Coast newspapers pick this story up. I suspect not. And I think that's a shame, because I think what it does is, again, it reinforces stereotypes, which I think are divisive and damaging to all of us. I also assume that as you are accepted by friends of yours in the black community for who you are, once they understand that you believe what you believe, I wonder if a lot of what I like to think of is the media elite, fellows like this fellow Todd Robertson. I don't think he understands you. I don't know him at all. I'm not a psychologist, but I suspect that he doesn't understand that you're coming just from a very different place and with a different set of principles and ideals than he has, and he can't tolerate that.
I don't really think he understands where I'm coming from, because he spent a great deal of time at the beginning of the relationship when we first started, going back and forth, and he was a lot more conversational back then, and he wanted me to write a piece about why I wrote for Donald Trump. And at first I thought, oh, okay, interesting. And he said, I'd like to encourage you to write that piece, because it would be a great peek into your mind, especially since, the Post-Dispatch, the readers don't know you yet. And I said, okay. And he said, let me tell you what I'm talking about. He said, I want you to explain to the readers how you wrapped your mind around voting for someone like Donald Trump. And I said, I didn't have to wrap my mind around it. Yeah. It was Hillary or Trump.
Right.
That was no choice. And he said, but surely his comments. And I said, surely Bill Clinton's rapes. And he said, well, surely, you understood the email controversy was trumped up. But I said,
oh my goodness, oh yeah,
this is not an issue for a good column.
He's an
open. He said, I disagree, and he kept coming back to me with that idea about me writing about Donald Trump. And the more insistent he became about me writing that column, the more I said, unless you're saying I have to write this column or I have to quit, I really think we're done talking about this. And I knew I couldn't write the column to his satisfaction. I even said, you're always talking about everything has to be factually based. It's an opinion column. I can't lie in it.
Yes, of course, it's your opinion.
Right, but if we're disagreeing about the actual opinion, that doesn't make what I'm saying a lie.
Right.
And
Stacy, I got full phone lines here, and I hate to do this to you because we're crunched on time. I think you're going to be happy with what you hear from some of my listeners. Okay?
Sounds good.
Great. Let's go to George in Warren, Massachusetts. George, we got full lines. Everybody's jumped on late. You're on with Stacy. Go right ahead.
Yes, I believe I agree with her 100% because she's a real true American in my book.
Well, Stacy, I hope you heard what George said. He says he agrees with you 100%, considers you an absolute true American. And I
thank you so much.
George,
it doesn't matter what color we are or what race we are or what religion we find. Real true Americans need to think this way. Well, once you start taking things away from people, that's when they get corrupt.
Yeah, well, real true Americans need to understand that people can come from different sets of circumstances and they should not be compartmentalized based upon some physical characteristic. George, I appreciate it. I want to get to a couple more calls real quickly, okay?
All right, thank you.
Thanks, George. Appreciate the call very much. Dan is in Worcester, Massachusetts. Dan, you're on with Stacy Washington. Go right ahead.
Yes, Miss Washington, I appreciate your courage in trying to have your own opinion rather than one that's developed and told to you. I do have one disagreement. Ultimately, as a Christian, I own guns, but I don't tie in Christ with guns. His robe isn't the American flag. He is God of the universe. And the thing is when men humble themselves to him, we have the founders and the wisdom to come up with the Constitution because they asked God for help. And
okay.
We got
all right, Dan, I appreciate your point of view. I really do, but I want to get one more caller in, okay? Thank you. Have a great night. No comment necessary. Stacy, Kathy is in New York. Kathy, welcome. You're on with Stacy Washington.
Oh, I came a little late to the segment, but wow, you are a breath of fresh air, Stacy. I mean, I've never heard of you before, and while I was listening to the segment, I kind of Googled to see what the story was. I look forward to wherever you head off to. I don't know what your plans are, but this is from somebody that's from New York, a heavily Democratic place. Dan knows me. I'm an independent, but I voted for Democrats most of my life. I voted for Obama twice, and then I became a deplorable and voted for Trump. But
that's an awesome story.
Gladly, though.
Thank you.
And I'm not really a gun person. My family's in law enforcement, but the thing is, that's the thing. That's what's drawing me to people with actually more of a conservative bent is that they hold their beliefs, but they don't have this venom in them against people that are liberal. The way I've seen the liberals have gone, they've just gone off the deep end. Like I told Dan.
There is a condescending attitude amongst some, not all, in my opinion, amongst some. I don't know, Stacy, if you would buy into that.
I mean, I feel like they're virtue signaling, and what they're doing is they're saying, I don't believe in guns because guns kill. Well, guns are tools like spoons and hammers. People kill, and people usually end up killing when they come from single-parent households. And when you point out that the majority of criminals come from single-parent households, they start talking about the racism that you're displaying and your innate hatred of certain types of people, when in reality, if you love someone, you're going to tell them, you look up ahead, there's danger. You know, the way to success in America is a two-parent household where both people have graduated from high school at a minimum, and they wait to have children until they're actually married. That's less than 3% chance of being in poverty if you just do those three things. If I say that, it's not because I hate you. I'm saying it because I actually care.
Yeah, and by the way, Kathy, we're flat out of time. I thank you so much for calling.
I'll definitely be checking you out, Stacy, though. Go, girl.
All right.
Thanks so much, Kathy.
well, you got a couple of fans, that's for sure. Stacy, we're flat out of time. Please, let's stay in touch. Keep fighting. Keep the faith. Keep on keeping on. And please stay there on the phone. I'd like to thank you off air, okay?
Thank you for having me tonight.
Very welcome.